Aiden O'Dell, you're standing for the ward of Sumners and Kingsmoor. Usually ask people what are the issues, but can we go firstly to the issue that has affected a lot of people, whether they're candidates, residents, patients, etc., of Barbara Castle House? Yes. Are people, our residents, our voters getting value for money?
Absolutely not. I mean, at the moment, we've gone through several stages with Addison House. Firstly, we had the merger, which occurred during the pandemic without consultation with patients, which is quite despicable, to be honest, because if there are changes, heavy changes like that, then we as patients deserve to know. Secondly, during the merger, the practices were joined, so Addison House and Barbara Castle were joined together, and what that meant was all of the practice management was then contained within Addison House and a centralised telephone system. So where we used to phone Barbara Castle Health Centre, we used to get through quite quickly. Now we're waiting on the lines for over an hour, even if we can get on phone calls without being kicked off first. Then what happened is Dr. Apache sadly retired after decades of working within Barbara Castle Health Centre. He's been my doctor for a number of years. Before him, he worked with Dr. Gopinath, who was there before Dr. Apache as well. And then Dr. Apache took on surgery afterwards. Dr. Apache's been brilliant within Sumners Kingsmoor for Barbara Castle Health Centre, and it was a really community spirit. He even remembered you. I luckily never went in there that often, but he still remembered who I was. The problem we've got now is because it's centralised and there's been a lack of communication, nobody knows who the doctor is anymore. Nobody knows who their named doctor is. And after speaking with Addison House, I've engaged with them numerous times over the last few months, talking about accessibility to the surgery. At the moment, it's very difficult to get an appointment via the phone. They're pushing people towards technology, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because if people like me can use the technology to access the surgery rather than phoning, we're then not going to be holding up somebody who doesn't have the technology to contact them. But there's a long way to go currently where we need to improve the communication. That's something that I'm working with Addison House on at the moment, is to make sure that all patients are aware of the changes. What they are going to be doing is, after our meetings, they're going to now send out a letter to all of those who do not have an email address within the system, and those with an email address, they're going to send an email to those, because there is, it's that balance between cost and contacting patients. There are some definite improvements that need to be made.
So one of the fundamentals is, do you want patients to be able to access doctors as the NHS pledges as has promised since the 40s?
Yeah, absolutely. So patients are entitled to speak to a doctor, and if Barbara Castle and Addison House are going to be using advanced nurse practitioners now, we need to understand what their capabilities are, what they're going to be taking on that doctors used to handle, and so on. So patients are aware of the changes, because people like me, if they're like, okay, we'll put you onto a nurse, they don't necessarily say we're going to put you in front of a advanced nurse practitioner. I feel like I'm not getting the service that I would like as a patient, because I'd like to speak to a doctor. But if advanced nurses are qualified and they're able to, then that's perfectly fine for me.
It's almost about over a year. This matter we've spoken to probably over a number of years, and over a year ago you said you're working on this. Is that for you to want to be the counsellor? Is that saying to people, this is the amount of hard work I will do for you on every piece of casework that I can?
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, I'm not an elected body at the moment. I'm not an elected politician in the council. I'm just doing this really solely. It's not even for political gain. It's really, I'm a patient. About a year ago I came down with a medical issue, which is now a chronic medical issue, so I'm ongoing, so I see it firsthand. I'm dealing it as a resident of Sumners and Kingsmoor, which I have been for numerous years, and if there's something which a lot of people are talking about on the doors like this, then it's a matter of urgency that something is rectified.
And the health service isn't just the only issue that's coming up on the doorstep. You've got colleagues who are out canvassing. What are the issues that have come up?
Yeah, so there's numerous issues. One of them mainly around here is antisocial behaviour. There seems to be a rise recently. Only the other week in the Herald, unfortunately, there was an incident. I don't know the full details about it, but we live in a part of town which is outside of the main hub, and we need to make sure that there is police presence around here. Now, one of the Labour initiatives that they completed when we were in power was the introduction of the community safety officers, which were employed by Harlow Council, but they worked quite closely with the police. I would like to see an increase of those around the town, making sure that we can have at least one or two, potentially, around each neighbourhood. Sumners, Kingsmoor, could be Catherine's, it could be wherever it is. We need to make sure that there's presence of secure, to ensure security for residents of Sumners, Kingsmoor. Additionally, we could increase the CCTV. Now, the local shops there constantly have people outside, and there's quite often some antisocial behaviour in terms of residents walking to the shops and then being harassed by a group of individuals. We should have CCTV there in order to make sure that people can be safe, and if there are offenders, then they're held to account for it.
There is a cost of living crisis, but are people speaking to you about the cost of living crisis?
There are. There's quite a few people. There was a gentleman that I was speaking to last week who, on the door, he's a self-employed person. He's voted Conservative all his life, but he's really worried about how he's going to survive, because the pandemic pushed a lot of pressure on his business and his family, and he wasn't able to work during the pandemic. But now because he owns a fleet of vans, he can't afford to fuel them, so he can't actually transact business. So it's that vicious circle, isn't it? He can't make the money because he can't afford to drive to the places where he does the jobs. And there are a lot of people who aren't necessarily on the poverty line who are now becoming closer to it, because the government seems to be pushing them, and there are steps the government can take to alleviate pressures on residents. For example, with the energy prices, the energy companies have taken massive profits over the last year, and yet we should be pushing a windfall tax on them to then reclaim and provide households with up to £600 back on their bills a year.
This is the third time you've stood here in Sumners and Kingsmoor,
it is,
right? It's
yeah.
A tough nut for you to crack. Does this time feel different at all?
There is something in the air. Now, I'm not going to jinx myself to say, yeah, I'm going to win it, because it is hard. Councillor Churchill's been in office for a number of years. It's a pity that he doesn't show up to his council meetings as often as I probably would, because in the last year I think it's only 2/3 of the time he's been there, which is not good enough in my opinion. It is a difficult nut, because we've got a lot of voter apathy here. We've got a lot of voters who don't necessarily go out to vote. We've got a lot of voters who are typically Conservative voters, and it's really convincing them that there is time for change in Sumners and Kingsmoor. It seems to have been neglected. You only need to look at Brocklesmead and Millwards. With the state of those areas, the Conservatives are pushing for a town-wide kind of overhaul and kind of making us proud of our town again. Yet they've been in control of Sumners and Kingsmoor for over 20 years now, and really the state of Sumners and Kingsmoor, when you look at Brocklesmead with wiring in the flats hanging down, and Councillor Churchill lives in Brocklesmead, so you'd think he would have done something about it by now. And if you look at Millwards needs a facelift. Something simple like just power hosing down the walls and a repaint of the council-owned flats, that would make such a stark improvement. And you look at some of the residents within Millwards, some of them have even created community gardens, and it looks amazing. And it's that sort of thing that we need more pride in Sumners.
So you say that's it, that's what your campaign already about, as you've mentioned, these areas of Mills and Brocklesmead, here we're in Taylifers. It's all about the local, and I'm not going to ask you questions about Boris Johnson or anything like that. No. You think it's the local issues and improving the day-to-day life of the local people. Absolutely.
We only need to look at the roads as well. You're going to laugh because we talk about potholes every conversation we have, but if we're talking about potholes, we only need to look at an area like Watersmeet. Watersmeet isn't council owned or anything like that, but the road, there is no road anymore. The tarmac's gone, and all there is the, I don't know what you call it, I'm not a builder, but you can only see the undersurface. There is no tarmac anymore, and they've been campaigning to have that fixed for years, and Essex County Council just aren't working on it.